Qualified, professional, and compassionate doctors talking real solutions to real health problems.
Do you have an abnormal discharge or itchiness or a wound in your genitals? Did you know that genital infections are among the common reasons a person would make a visit to the doctor? With me in studio is Dr. Chigundu Spire and Dr. Sematimba Kato from Henrob Medical Center to tell us more about genital infections and all the misconceptions surrounding that. So most welcome to the show, doctors.
Thank you.
And again, I'm your host for the evening, Dr. Darius Owachi. So without wasting further time, let's dig into understanding more about these genital infections and all the myths surrounding it. So maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Chigundu. You know, genital infections are quite a sensitive and potentially embarrassing issue in couples' lives. And there are lots of myths around it. So just give us an idea, what exactly are these genital infections that are causing these unpleasant symptoms?
Genital infections are infections that affect the genital tract, that is male and female.
Okay.
And urine tract infections are infections that affect the urinary system. Sometimes people confuse the two.
Actually, that was going to be the next question. What is the difference between the genital infections and the urine infections? Are they the same? Most people think they are the same. So I want to know tonight, are these the same terms?
Certainly they are not the same, though in men there is an interlinkage of the two because the genital system in a man serves both as a urine tract system. So most infections that affect men usually go through the tube that passes urine, what we call the urethra, and it is the same tube that we use for genital purposes. Okay. So genital infections and urinary tract infections in men are more like almost the same. Okay. But in females, genital infections are different from urine tract infections because the systems are quite separate. Yes, and commonly urine tract infections will affect the tube that passes urine, what we call the urethra. Then the infection ascends slowly, if untreated, into the bladder. That is what we call cystitis. Okay. Then from the bladder, if unattended to, the infection will ascend to the tubes that carry urine from the kidneys, and we call those ureters. And eventually, the infection can spill over into the kidneys.
All right.
So that is the track of the infection in
that
the
is the urine system. Yes. Whereas the genital system refers primarily to the reproductive system. Yes. So saying in men, where is the linkage? Because you say the two are interlinked. So where is the linkage in men? The reproductive and the genital system and the urinary system.
You know, the male system essentially. The tube that carries urine, what we call the urethra, plays real double purposes in a man because it is the same tube that carries semen. Okay. The only difference is that the genital tract in a male ends into the testis, but the urine system, still from the bladder up to the kidney, is different. So they join at the point of the bladder.
At the point of the bladder.
Yes.
So that's why the interlinkage is. All right. So Dr. Sematimba, now the big question is, most people commonly think sexually transmitted disease, which is primarily a genital infection, is the same as a UTI. Why is this so, and what is the difference between the two?
Genital tract infections affect the genital system or the system used for reproduction.
Okay.
So the system used for reproduction is quite different or could have some similarities with the system used for collecting and passing urine. So because of the small differences and similarities, it brings some confusion, especially in the community. However, the urinary tract infections affect the system from urethra, bladder, ureter, and kidneys. Kidneys are the ones which make the urine. And the sexually transmitted infection, like it appears, they are through contact during sex. They are transmitted through contact during sex.
So how about the UTIs? How would the UTIs now be acquired or got? If you're saying the systems are different for the genital infections, it's primarily during the act of the reproduction, right? The sexual act. So UTIs, how do they come about?
Now, urinary tract infections could also be due to acquisition of microorganisms or bacteria that can essentially ascend from urethra upwards. So we usually pick these microbes or microorganisms from the environment, and then they get their way into the body, and then they access the tract, which will lead. When these microorganisms, sometimes the system clears them, but sometimes they overwhelm the body and they cause disease, and we get urinary tract infection. The commonest being infection of the bladder, which is called cystitis.
So regarding genital infections per se, Dr. Chigundu, what are examples of these genital infections? Now you're raising people's curiosities. They thought UTIs were the same as genital infections, but they're not. So which are the examples?
Genital infections, as we elaborated earlier, being infections of the genital tract, can be categorized into different groups. There are those which cause discharges, and under these we have Candida albicans. Candida is a fungus, which is literally almost the most common genital infection that causes discharges. Then we have other infections that cause discharges like Trichomonas vaginalis. It causes a yellowish discharge, which sometimes is itchy. Then you have
Bacterial vaginosis.
Yes, bacterial vaginosis. So those essentially are the three most common.
Most common genital infections.
That cause discharges.
That cause discharge.
Discharges, yes.
Okay.
But that mentioned, there are other things that can cause discharges, which we really can't overlook. Things like cancer of the cervix, cancer of the uterus. It's very good to talk about them because sometimes women do not know that any discharge warrants to see a doctor. Every time a woman sees a discharge, you should not just think about infections alone.
Okay.
You should also think about the big ones, like yes, cancer of the genital tract. Some of these come with bad offensive discharges. But some of these infections can also cause cancer of the cervix, for example, and cancer of the vagina is caused by another group of infections, the one we call, there are some viruses. Yeah? We have the herpes, we have the HPV, especially that HPV, human papillomavirus. It is a very common sexually transmitted disease and a genital infection that causes cancer of the cervix, genital warts, and cancer of the vagina. Then you have those that gives you ulcers or wounds in the private parts.
Right. I think we'll come back shortly to explore more about these infections. It appears to be a very wide group, and we're just kind of scratching the surface and going into depth of each of the diseases. But we'll be back shortly after the break to discuss more. If you have questions regarding this topic, regarding UTIs or genital infections or STDs, we want to decipher all those myths and misconceptions around it. So send in your comments, send in your questions to us on our social media handles. We'll be happy to reply and respond to each one of them. Don't go away, stay, we'll be right back.
You are watching the Doctalk Show.